He was just inept. He was not cut out to be an infantry officer. I mean, God bless him. Some people were thrown into the infantry. They had no right whatsoever to be there. They didn't have the ability. They didn't have the level of consciousness it takes to be an infantryman.
An old infantryman looks back at his 3 tours in Vietnam to tell us about one soldier, an Army officer, the son of a powerful man who had no business being in a war. Hello, and welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. No single writer has taken more Mighty Pen classes or has written as many stories about combat and soldiering than David Aldridge. In Vietnam, David experienced just about everything a foot soldier can go through. He witnessed and took part in the good, the terrible, and in the case of today's story, Bombolini, the in-between. David's story, Bombolini, will be performed by Alan Sater. Then David Aldrich and I will talk about how the jungles of Vietnam exposed who had the makings of an infantry officer, who could lead and protect his men, and who had the bone marrow courage needed to do all that under fire. Let's listen to Bombolini, read by Alan Sater.
It was October 1970. I'd just gotten a call from my new battalion commander. It was a simple request. Take First Lieutenant Bombolini under my care and teach him how to be a combat leader. I said, "Oh, no thanks, sir. I'd rather walk through a minefield blindfolded." He laughed and said, "It's his last chance to earn his CIB before he goes back to the States." The CIB was the Combat Infantry Badge. Only infantry soldiers who had been in combat were allowed to be awarded the CIB. It was so highly prized that it was worn above all other awards and decorations on the dress uniform. We were on our secure radios, so we didn't use a lot of proper military radio procedures. No one but others with the right key could listen in, and First Lieutenant Bombolini was out of earshot back in San Juan Hill, our base camp, just west of Duck Foe. Bombolini wasn't his real name. It was an affectionate nom de guerre I had given him after the character played by Anthony Quinn in the movie The Secret of Santa Victoria. It seemed to fit his personality, so that's how I referred to him. He was an officer, but he was constantly fucking up, and as I told Lieutenant Colonel Albert Coast, "I'm sorry, but I don't want him to get someone killed, sir." "If you supervise him correctly, no one will get killed." How could I refuse an offer after that? "Okay, sir, but before he comes to the bush, I want him to prove to me he can set up a mech without any help. If he can do it, then I'll take him on the next operation. If he can't, then he goes back to Combat Indoctrination Course School in Chulai, and then he can come to the bush." Lieutenant Colonel Coast merely said, "Okay, you're due to come back to San Juan Hill in a couple of days. See you then. Out." I was the first sergeant of Delta Company, 4th Battalion, 3rd Infantry Regiment, Old Guard. We were part of the infamous Americal Division in I Corps. I was 25 years old, and on my 3rd tour in Vietnam, our beloved Lieutenant Colonel Albert Coast thought that because I was on my 3rd tour, some sort of magical pixie dust would rub off me onto L.T. Bombolini and turn him into a real bona fide combat soldier. When the day came to return to our base camp at San Juan Hill, we couldn't get any air transportation. My pixie dust wasn't working. We ended up walking back from 10 kilometers out, every infantryman's nightmare. Up and down hills, through triple canopy jungles. By the time we got to the top of San Juan Hill, 1,250 feet elevation, we were exhausted. I had half our company go get some chow, and the others started cleaning their weapons. The mess hall had closed an hour before, but our very thoughtful cooks were holding some hot food for us. After I made sure that everyone had eaten, I found First Lieutenant Bombolini and gave him one of my Macs. A Mac is short for Mechanized Ambush, consisting of a claymore mine, the blasting cap, electrical wire, a battery, and a tripwire attached to the handle of a plastic spoon. It's basically a booby trap. Under the Geneva Convention, we Americans were allowed to use them, because each mech was plotted on a map at headquarters, with coordinates showing where it was emplaced. We used wooden clothespins. The exposed tips of the electrical wire were attached to the clothespin's jaws. We inserted the plastic spoon handle between the jaws to keep the circuit from being completed. When the enemy walked down a trail and hit the almost invisible tripwire, it would pull the spoon out, and the jaws would close the electrical circuit, thereby detonating the blasting cap, thus killing whoever it was aimed at. I told the LT to set up the mech for me, but not to put the blasting cap inside the claymore mine. I stood back and just observed. It was like watching Jerry Lewis or one of the Three Stooges go to war. He promptly almost blew his fingers off. I said, "Sorry, LT, but you're going back to CIC school." He whined, "But I've already graduated." "Well, I don't see how you did that, sir." I walked over to Lieutenant Colonel Coast-Hooch and hollered, "Sir, he almost blew his fingers off. If you want him to come to the bush with us, please send him back to CIC school again." Lieutenant Colonel Coast told me that Major Frakes, his S-3 Air, would handle it. 2 weeks later, a newly regraduated First Lieutenant Bombolini was flown out to our combat logger position with resupplies and some mail. The world's only 2-time graduate of the combat indoctrination course hopped off the Huey. I signaled him to come over to me. Well, maybe he would get his coveted combat infantryman's badge on this operation. I wasn't convinced they had him transformed in the week-long course. We'd waited in the valley at the bottom of the mountain for him to be flown in. I distributed the supplies and mail. I made him take out the magazine from his weapon and eject the round in the chamber so that he wouldn't accidentally shoot someone in a firefight. I just didn't trust him yet. When his weapon was empty, I told him where to fall in because we could only go up the mountain in single file. I tried to keep it as simple as I could. "LT, we're just going for a little walk up the mountain. I'm walking point. If we hit any shit, then me and Doc Lansing will handle it. If we need any more help, then we'll holler for the machine gun to come up. You stay right where you are, behind the medic. Do not fire your weapon unless I come back and tell you to. Understood?" "Okay, Dave." He seemed to understand what I was telling him, so I took off. 4 hours later, we were near the top of the mountain where it leveled off. I decided this would make a good ambush position. I positioned the rest of my 45 men around in a box-like shape. I told the LT, "Now look, in the bush, everyone is responsible for setting up their own mech. If your mech blows, then you are the guy who has to go check it out. No one else knows where you put the damn thing, so remember where it is, okay?" He looked at me like my dog used to look at me when I was scolding him. "Sure, Dave. I understand. If it blows, then I have to check it out." I told the LT that I would give him the place of honor for that night and let him set up his one and only mech facing uphill from our position on the hardball trail leading to the top of the mountain. I showed him where to put his mech and drifted back downhill, where I placed 2 mechs to cover our rear on a small trail that branched off the main hardball trail. I finished and headed back to where I had my gear. I fired up a cigarette and drank half a canteen of water. I pulled out some lerp rations, started cooking some water to mix in with the freeze-dried chicken stew. I readied my Tabasco sauce and toked on my cigarette. Life was good. We'd climbed one of the biggest hills near Laos that day and had not had any firefights or hit any booby traps. Bam! Someone's mech exploded and we all hit the deck, crawling behind trees and rocks for cover. I was showered with bits of rock, dirt, and debris from the surrounding trees. Adrenaline surged through my body as I whispered as loud as I dared, "Whose mech was that?" One after the other, my soldiers said, "Negative, Dave, wasn't mine." Finally, I yelled, "LT?" I got no answer for the next couple of minutes. Cursing, I told everyone, "Son of a fucking bitch, I fucking knew it. It has to be the LT's mech. I have to go check it out. Someone get up and come cover me, just in case. Bring a few grenades with you." I threw on some bandoliers of extra magazines, put 3 grenades in my side pockets. I moved up the hill, slowly at first. It was almost dusk, so I decided to hurry. I knew that the LT's mech was 50 meters to the front, so I covered the first 30 meters quickly. I started whispering, "LT, where the fuck are you?" No answer. The jungle was eerily quiet. I moved closer to where I had last seen Bombolini. As I got closer, I could smell cordite from the claymore. I saw some movement, almost let loose with 30 rounds, but I held my fire. "LT's that you?" I crouched low in case someone shot at me. I could make out the outline of a human being just standing there, shaking from head to toe. I strained my eyes to understand what I was seeing. I moved up to 5 feet away from him and saw the crater in the ground at his feet. The crater was 3 feet wide. His jungle fatigues were shredded, and he was covered in dirt and cordite from the mine. Blood ran from both ears onto his neck and then onto his fatigue shirt. I said, "What the fuck happened, LT?" His breath came in spasms, and he finally pushed out, "I just wanted to test the tripwire." My mind reeled. "You tested the fucking tripwire? Oh, Jesus Christ." I helped gather up all his equipment, looked for his helmet. It had been blown 10 meters behind him. I picked up his weapon, put my arm around him, and we moved back to our logger position. I asked the head medic to check him out on his legs and arms for other wounds. I made the radio call to Lieutenant Colonel Coast to get the LT picked up the next day. I put lots of extra Tabasco on my chicken stew that night, just to get rid of the taste of cordite. Epilogue. First Lieutenant Bombolini survived his tour and went back to the States. Lieutenant Colonel Albert F. Coast was killed in Vietnam on 20 April 1971. God bless them both.
That was David Aldrich's story, Bombolini, read by Alan Sater. David, in all of my time with the Mighty Pen and the Warriors, I've heard about every kind of soldier, seaman, Coast Guard, Marine, airman, every kind. And I've heard about courage and I've heard about cowardice, but Bombolini is the only character I've heard about in between. Not a coward and perhaps not a hero. What was he?
He was just inept. He was not cut out to be an infantry officer. I mean, God bless him. Some people were thrown into the infantry. They had no right whatsoever to be there. They didn't have the ability. They didn't have the level of consciousness it takes to be an infantryman. And being an infantryman, a lot of people think, well, if you're not smart enough, you go in the infantry. Well, that's bullshit. Some of the smartest guys I ever knew were infantrymen.
What was the thing that had you been able to give it to him, he would have pulled this off?
I would say common sense. His father was serving in Vietnam at the same time. I don't want to say what his father's job was, but he would call his father and he would say, "Sir, this is your son." "How are you, sir?" He always called his father sir or by his rank. And, I'm hollering at him in the background, "Call him Dad, God damn it." And some friends of mine were also hollering at him, "Call him Dad, you son of a bitch." say, how the hell are you, Dad? You know?
So this was maybe a Nepo baby.
Yeah. He had been to one of the academies, so I guess he was expected to carry on the name in the Army, and he just wanted to make his father proud, I think. And so he always tried to be that infantry officer everybody looked up to, and it just didn't work.
How much time do you have to spend in combat to get that badge?
I don't think there's an actual time requirement, although some divisions did try to make a time requirement. They'd said like 30 days. In the AmeriCal division, I don't think there was a set time. If you had been through a firefight out on a mission, you probably qualified
Right.
for the CIB, but he never made it to that one firefight.
3 tours. How many mortar attacks? How many firefights?
Oh, firefights, I don't know, 150 in 1,000 days. Mortar attacks, I haven't really tried to count those up. I'd say at least a dozen, but probably more because they were highly inaccurate. So thank God.
So one of the things that leaps out at me, that always leaps out at me when we deal with your work, is 3 tours. Not common. What took you back for your third one? Because first tour, okay, I understand. You miss your men. You're trained. You're drawn back for the second tour. We've talked about that. And third tour is the one that confounds me.
Well, I re-enlisted in April of 1970. And as soon as I re-enlisted at Fort Carson, Colorado, I received orders sending me back to Vietnam because that made sure that I had enough time to complete another tour. Believe me, I didn't really want to go. I was quite happy with my second tour. I was quite happy being at home with my family. I was quite happy not being shot at anymore. But since I was going back for my third tour, I tried to do my best. I tried to do my duty. They sent me to the AmeriCal division, which did not have the best reputation at that time because they were the division that experienced the My Lai
That was Cali.
incident with
Yeah.
Cali and Medina and all them.
Okay, but that tells me what you did in your third tour. What was going on in your life that took you back to a third tour?
Well, I was still in the Army. Remember, I had left the Army in 1967 and rejoined 6 months later to go back for my second tour. So I had basically less than a year to do in 1970, and it wasn't enough time to complete a tour in Vietnam, so I wasn't eligible to go back. When I re-enlisted for 6 more years, they said, oh, you got enough time.
So that was a surprise. You didn't expect that?
No, because allegedly nobody was going back to Vietnam on their third tour.
Allegedly writ large.
Yeah, it was an unwritten law. They had even published it in the newspaper that nobody's in Vietnam on their third tour, involuntary third tour. And so my mother went to our congressman and tried to get me out of Vietnam, but they said, nah, too late. He'll have to finish his tour now that he's there. So it was a big surprise, but, I wanted to do the best I could. I had good people like Lieutenant Colonel Coast, one of the greatest combat leaders I ever had. And he wanted to make a soldier out of Bombolini. Just couldn't do it. He was, I don't know, he was self-destructive in his lack of consciousness. He was going to hurt somebody.
So he climbed up 20, 30 more meters up the mountain to his mech to check on it.
No, he had in place the mech with the tripwire and everything. I don't know what in the world possessed him to take a stick and drop it on the tripwire while he was standing there. It just befuddled me. I wanted to curse him. I wanted to punch him out. But I couldn't do anything except put my arm around his shoulder and say, Jesus Christ, LT, What the fuck, man?
So
You almost killed yourself.
you walked him down the slope and
And the next day I got him medevaced. He couldn't hear shit. His eardrums were blown out. I'm surprised he didn't blow his eyeballs out, because a lot of times concussion will cause your eyeballs to actually pop out of your head.
okay.
I was surprised he could still see.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
really, it's just insane.
And never heard from again as far as you're concerned.
I checked on him. He's still alive. He's still alive.
But his career was what?
Wasn't in the Army.
No, not even with
He's-
Dad, not
no,
even with
he-
Sir Dad.
Not even with his father pulling from his high rank. No, he ended up doing something else entirely. He was not an infantryman. No.
Many of us aren't. Describe for me the blast of a mech.
Oh, it's, my goodness. If you're close to it, it sounds like the end of the world, because it's a claymore with about 2.5 pounds of C4 in it. It will actually shred whoever it hits, tear them to pieces. And it leaves a crater. One claymore can take out an entire squad of enemy. So it's pretty vicious. It's pretty vicious. And he was standing right next to it. That's what I mean. It was only by the grace of God he's still alive.
You said he was the only two-time graduate of the combat indoctrination course.
Yeah, nobody ever had to go
Nobody
through
had
it the second time. Just this poor guy. And my heart still goes out to him, you know. Thank God he didn't get anybody killed. He didn't kill himself. You have to have a little compassion in life. And he was trying to live up to some kind of odd standard of, I don't know, heroism by serving in the infantry in the first place. And my heart just went out to him. Geez, he's still kind of one of those tragic figures in your life, like Shakespearean tragic figures.
So you served 3 tours in Vietnam on active duty.
Right.
And after active duty, you stayed in the military in some function, yeah?
Yes.
Tell me.
I ended up being a Pershing missile crewman for nuclear weapons. I did that for a couple of years, and then I became a lawyer's assistant, working in the JAG Corps, doing investigations and courtroom drama. We used to have 2 programs, the physician's assistance program and the lawyer's assistance program. And the physician's assistant program they kept. They did away with the lawyer's assistance program because they didn't want people thinking that they could practice law without a license.
So it's much better to practice medicine
Without a
without a
license.
license. Yes, of course.
It was a very successful program. We got to investigate all levels of crime in the military, murder on down. I got to actually sit in the courtroom with the trial counsel or with the defense counsel, be at the table with them, and the judges deferred to us a lot. We even were allowed to speak in court. I actually prosecuted 2 cases in a general court-martial as an enlisted man. So that was a great career, and that's what I retired as. I ended up being the chief legal NCO for the 1st Infantry Division, and I retired in Germany, 1988. Then I went right to work for the United States Army as a civilian.
So you are the definition of a lifer.
Yes, and proudly so, because I loved my work, I loved my job, I loved serving my country, and being a good ambassador overseas for my nation also.
Last question.
Mm-hmm.
I know you just got back from Vegas,
Yes, I did.
where you had a reunion with some of your old platoon and squad mates.
Yes.
I'm going to assume you had fun. I'm going to assume it was great to see them. But what is it like seeing faces that you saw so long ago as young men and you met them in these circumstances? I want you to try to describe for me the bond that no one else will understand other than men and women who have faced combat together.
you have spent time with these men in a situation that is so unbelievably hostile. First of all, the elements, the jungle, not being able to shower, being in firefights every other day. You have been with these people in the worst time of their lives, and you have seen them perform heroically, and it does something to your heart. I like to say Vietnam was the first place I ever learned to love another man. I learned to love somebody unconditionally in Vietnam, and I'll always be grateful for that. Always. You've seen these people at the worst day of their lives, and they were magnificent. And to be able to see them again and to see what they've done with their lives just makes them all that more lovable for me. I've stayed in contact with these people for the last 60 years, 55 years, and there just are no finer men on this earth.
It seems that combat forms unbreakable bonds. I've heard that before. Now,
Yes.
for me, on a personal note, I could have done all of that except for the not showering. That's a no. No, that's
Well,
a
you
no.
could always step out in the middle of a monsoon
If
rain
I would have if I
with a
had
bar
to.
of soap, and that was tough to do because you would go 2 or 3 weeks without showering.
No, that's it. Nope.
Yeah.
Give me the mortar attack, buddy. Not doing that. All right, David Aldridge, my brother, my friend.
Oh, God bless you.
Much love. The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you would like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mpodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best write and tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's piece and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor